Welcome to Homer's Anonymous. It's March 10th, and today I'm dubbing today Chipmas for Chip Kelly for the many, many gifts he's given us in this year's NFL free agency. We had a pretty crazy day, so we pretty much decided that we're going to have it be a NFL heavy podcast. So, we can just dive on into, Chip Kelly, what the hell is going on?
A lot of people made this comment already, but it seems like he's just playing Madden at this point. And
yeah, when you start your franchise,
yeah,
you look at the players and your salaries, and you're just like, they're good, but I could do just as well with a player.
Tearing it all down.
We'll talk about the individual trades and signings a little bit more, but it's like he's decided. Doesn't matter the skill players. He believes that he can find the skill players for lower salary that can do what he needs to be done within his system. He's pretty much. I can't think of another coach in the NFL who trusts his system enough to trade away two of the best players in their skill positions, and then in previous years, last year he let Deshaun Jackson leave. So
no, it's all pretty crazy. I saw a stat today that they no one who's thrown a pass or had a carry from Andy Reid's teams left on this roster.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense. It's been a decent turnaround, but you can't be quite angry with him yet. I can imagine some Eagles fans are angry with him, but after 2 10-10 seasons and one playoff appearance, got them a home playoff game his first season, and then they just ran into a great Dallas team this year. I can't imagine him being or people having too much reason to disagree with what he's doing.
I mean, yeah, Philly's brain trust knew what they were getting into because, as you remember, he was negotiating with the Browns that summer and turned them down, decided no, he was going to stay at Oregon, wanted to keep doing college ball, and out of nowhere, the Eagles grabbed him. They knew what they were getting into. They knew he'd want to make the team in his image, and we've seen already, I believe it was Howie Roseman who made a power play to try and get rid of Chip's guys, and instead Chip Kelly ended up winning that and got even more personnel control. We heard rumors, I think a month ago, that the Eagles might even be getting rid of him, and he clearly did something to convince them to let him do his thing and have a project there.
Right. It all started with that McCoy trade. I mean, that McCoy trade alone, which was a very rare straight up trade, LeSean McCoy for Kiko Alonso from the Bills, who maybe it got blown out of proportion a little bit by Kiko being out this whole past year, but people forget that he was was he Rookie of the Year, defensive player?
Yeah,
defensive Rookie of the Year his first year. He was a very solid player. I remember him having 4 interceptions against the Ravens when we played them, and me thinking, "Oh my God, who is this guy?" So they get a solid defensive player in return in an entire side of the ball that they really struggled on last year. But do you think it's worth it?
This trade, so like you said, starting this all off, I actually like that trade more for the Eagles than the Bills. My reasoning being, it's harder to find a Kiko Alonso type, with that quality. Granted, the big question mark is his injury. But a guy on that side of the ball who's young, who's cheap, which is so important in today's NFL, right. And they want to line him up next to Michael Kendricks and just have a young core. They're not paying too much for it, and they're saving that money, and they think they can replace McCoy or sign, like we're hearing, maybe a DeMarco Murray for a little less money and gain someone like Kiko Alonso to shore up that defense.
Yeah, the DeMarco Murray rumors, I think they're baseless, though. After seeing what we just said, and that he feels like he has skill, can get skill position players who are making far less, either on their rookie contracts still or just free agent contracts. He feels he can plug people who maybe aren't name brand players into his system and still be successful. And DeMarco Murray is completely the opposite of that.
Right, I agree. And like you said, the system being important, one interesting thing to note is we heard over the weekend that Frank Gore would be signing with them, and now he's not signing with them. He might be going to the Colts. And it seems like from the little we've heard about it that Frank Gore had doubts about how he'd fit into the offense. It's very high tempo, and Frank Gore's he's one of the most patient runners in the NFL. He's 32 now. He has a lot of carries. You know, for all that Frank Gore gets hurt talk, he hasn't missed a game in 4 years. You know, maybe he's the right counterbalance they need, but he seems like he might not want to be in that role, and that's why we've seen him like renege on that deal.
Yeah, I mean, that we won't know the extent of their success from all these dealings for a while. Obviously, that you could say that of a lot of these trades, but I'm not willing to dub getting rid of your 26-year-old running back for a 23 or 24-year-old promising young linebacker when running back is probably the most replaceable position in the league. I mean, the Ravens plugged in Justin Forsett.
Right.
You know, Denver plugged in C.J. Anderson for 6 games at the end of last year.
Yeah.
It's a replaceable position when you have the offensive line and the system to just get 10 yards in every 4 plays. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's all you're trying to do. You have 4 plays to get 10 yards. You need a guy that can get you 4 yards a carry, and like that's not just on the running back. That's on every other position too to help produce that.
Well, yeah, and we have a lot of positions to cover with the Eagles. They've done a good job of getting us to talk about them. But they, you were talking about the offensive line. It's graded by, I believe, either Pro Football Focus or Football Outsiders as the best line in the year of last year. So, you know, like you said, they feel like they can go get someone at cheap cost. They already have Chris Polk, who they like from Washington. Last year, they used him in a lot of goal line situations. They got Sproles for what they need him for. They're not necessarily committed to the idea of having a primary runner, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that Frank Gore rumor that came up, I wasn't crazy about the idea of it because I've kind of felt like he wasn't really the ideal runner for like a Chip Kelly kind of offense. You know, like you said, patient, like relies on his instincts to pick the right hole and then hits it. But when you come to think of him, I guess, complimenting Darren Sproles, I feel like it probably could have worked. But like Darren Sproles pretty much picks up that LaShawn McCoy role. LaShawn McCoy's very good receiving back out of the backfield. Obviously very shifty. Darren Sproles can do all of those things. Maybe not to the extent of LaShawn McCoy, but I feel like now they just need to find a downhill runner that can be the thunder to Darren Sproles' lightning. You know, so I feel like they're still in a good place in the running game. Like they've got the draft coming up. You know, free agency is still like in its early stages. Like we'll see what they do, and after all these moves, you know that they're not done.
Yeah, and you made a good point with Chip Kelly. He's clearly trying to exploit what he perceives to be market inefficiencies. He thinks the running back position's undervalued, and thus he can, you know, ship out McCoy, get a guy he likes linebacker, and just clearly he thinks he can either draft his replacement or find him. So the draft's going to be interesting to watch him. You know,
but what you said about LaShawn McCoy, about running backs, where he perceives the running back position of being undervalued. It's undervalued to the extent until you get into those like top 3 or 4 name brand running backs like DeMarco Murray, LaShawn McCoy, Marshawn Lynch. You can like he's smart because he knows that teams like Buffalo and he knows teams or a team like a Cleveland or someone are willing to give up a lot to get a LaShawn McCoy, because LaShawn McCoy fills seats and sells jerseys and is an electrifying and great player. But he understands that's not entirely what we need right now, and maybe we can give up a little bit to get a lot in the future, which, like I said before, you can't like come to conclusions right now, but I like his thought process.
Yeah, and I agree too. If he's clearly trying to build something, and I really appreciate that, because he's not just thinking, like this season. Like, granted, it may fail, but he's trying to get something like special going there, build a team that can hopefully, in his eyes, compete for a number of years, not just another year or two until they're stuck in salary cap hell. And he knows the kind of players he wants. He's going out to get them. Like, a lot of guys think, which is their job on the line, and that's a lot of the mistakes we see in the NFL. You can see a team, I won't pick anyone in particular, but, a guy comes in, he sees he has a 3-year window, will go out and overpay guys trying to compete, and when it doesn't work, they bring in a new guy, he's stuck in salary cap hell, and he has to make quick moves to correct it to not lose his job, and it's just a cycle. So I think it's great that it seems like they're giving him time to figure out what he wants to do there. And if they have a little bit of growing pains, so be it if they think it'll be a better team for this.
Yeah, the LaShawn McCoy trade, I guess, got more media attention because at the time it came out of nowhere as the big news of the day last week. But I think the one that just affects the whole team more and is harder to kind of create conclusions on is the Nick Foles trade. They traded Nick Foles to St. Louis for Sam Bradford, who was out all of last year, and before that wasn't doing anything to be super convincing. And they also got some draft picks in return. I don't think those have been disclosed yet, but that to me was a lot more of a puzzling deal because I and I'm sure a lot of other people really liked how their offense was performing with Nick Foles in there. Their season only really fell apart once he went down and they had to have Mark Sanchez be their quarterback. So it's puzzling. Only Chip Kelly knows what he's doing. You know, Sam Bradford, he obviously still thinks has what it takes and still believes in him to run his system and run his offense. Or he's acquired him and he's going to try and parlay him into something to move up and get Marcus Mariota, like so many other people are predicting or reporting that the Eagles want to do.
So that's where it's interesting to me. I'm going to actually slightly disagree with you here. I think higher Bradford and probably lower Foles than you do.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But you bring up Mariota, and that's the thing. You know, a lot of speculation, but it seems more and more in this Eagles situation where there's speculation, there's some fire to it. Like, we know they would love to get Mariota. Now, whether they're going to pay an extortion price or not remains to be seen, and they may be getting Bradford just for that. But if he likes Bradford as the guy and they're not going to draft Mariota, it's an interesting situation to me because he doesn't seem like the guy necessarily that you'd be wanting that running that offense, but he played in a similar type of offense at Oklahoma. I actually believe that when healthy, and that is a huge if with Sam Bradford, as you pointed out, he can be better than Foles. It seemed to me from watching the Eagles last year and this year that what Foles did, in his breakout season was an unsustainable ratio of touchdowns to interceptions where he wasn't getting picked off. And we saw, defenses, maybe they had more game film on or whatnot, but he wasn't doing nearly as well last year, even though the team was doing better.
He was... I feel like he was doing pretty well last year. They were in first in that division on their way to a playoff spot before Mark Sanchez had to be the quarterback. Obviously, he wasn't scoring 6 touchdowns in a game like he did the previous season when he came in.
Don't remind me, that was against Oakland.
Yeah, no, that and I agree with you that big breakout second half of the season he had in 2013 was probably mostly due to the fact that there was no game film on him. He had a couple games here and there where he was still learning himself how to play the quarterback position. And last year was going to be his first chance to really have a full 16 games, and people had more of an idea of what he was going to do from that 2013 season. So he certainly wasn't putting up huge stats, but he was winning. He was winning games. I don't know. I definitely, like you said, I definitely think higher of him than I think of Sam Bradford, because Bradford for me was just one of those guys who he looked like a deer in the headlights. You'd see I remember a Monday night game against the Jets back in 2012 or 2013. He was playing at the Jets, and who had a good defense at the time, but Sam Bradford, your number 1 overall pick, you threw for multiple records at Oklahoma and you were a Heisman candidate. He just hasn't looked anywhere near as confident or attack-minded as he did at Oklahoma. People feared him. It was him, Colt McCoy, and Tim Tebow, who everyone was arguing about who's the better quarterback, and everyone had just came to the conclusion that Colt McCoy and Tim Tebow weren't right for the NFL, but Sam Bradford was. And that's still pretty much come true since 2 of them are almost out of the league, and Sam is obviously still in it. But he hasn't looked as confident, and defenses have to react to him. I feel like he's reacting to defenses, which great quarterbacks don't do. Even good quarterbacks don't do that.
Well, so And again, a bit of a disagreement here as well as difference in philosophies. I suppose I'm a little more guilty of looking, and I hate using this term, looking at a quarterback's upside a little more. Like, I still see things in even Geno Smith that I like. Granted, Geno still sucks, but I've seen like a lot of stuff from last year that I actually did like of Geno. I think one play stood out to us, not to go in too much of a tangent, was the one where he tied up against the Packers, and they inadvertently called timeout right before it, and he made one of the nicest throws we've seen last year. Similarly with Bradford, I liked a lot of the great stuff I've seen out of him, and this is just my opinion, I think that his best is better than what Nick Foles is capable of, and I look at this trade as Chip Kelly taking a risk. Like, we're going to gamble that Sam Bradford is healthy, and if so, he'll give us more than what Foles can do. Now, the thing is, we know, like, we didn't make this trade. Like, it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what Chip Kelly thinks. And I'm not in Chip Kelly's mind, but I'd have to guess he's looking at it as, you need a quarterback that can win in this league, and he doesn't think that Foles is the guy. I somewhat disagree with that.
He's done it more than Sam Bradford.
Well, and that's where I somewhat disagree. But he thinks that Bradford can be the right guy in that offense. Maybe with the lack of weapons, he thinks Sam Bradford can do more with less, considering he's at least played in that situation in St. Louis. And again, this is just me completely speculating. So I understand the idea of, if it's not going to work, might as well like cut bait while he can still get something for Foles. I would have thought Foles' trade value would be higher. Like I said, even though I think Bradford is better with his injury history, I think they could have gotten more. And we'll see what those picks turn out to be. But I agree with you that it is nonetheless a puzzling move.
What do you think about it in terms of the St. Louis angle of the trade? Because they had a top 5 or 10 defense last year.
Yeah, I get it for them. Like I said, I like Bradford better, but I think he's, and this is pretty cliche, he's worn out his welcome there, so to speak. Like, we heard Jeff Fisher give that whole Sam Bradford is our quarterback speech, but he also gave his agent permission. The NFL has that rule where you can legally cheat on your team as long as you have permission to seek out a trade or whatnot. And they let Sam Bradford do that. I think, they looked at him at somewhat of a sunk cost. Because they got him, they ended up trading that RG3 pick, which worked out great for them. But, RG3 was a guy they would have looked into. I guess the end result would have been more or less the same, but I think they were just ready to move on, and that played into it as well. We knew that Foles was a guy they've been coveting. That we've heard for a little while, where they were looking to trade for him. They finally got their guy. They're going to have to eat some of that dead money from Sam Bradford's contract, if I'm not mistaken. But on the other hand, Nick Foles is going to come a lot cheaper, and he's a guy they clearly think they can still develop a little further.
Yeah, he's still, to me, he still feels like he's a third-year player. He's a third-year quarterback to me. And he's a third-year player in terms of experience of actually being on the field. But he sat on that bench for those Michael Vick couple of years, and he's a mature player off the field who is I still feel has a higher ceiling on it. I don't know if it will necessarily become wins next year, because that division is tough.
Though the Niners are falling.
Well, yeah, but you still have Arizona, Arizona and Seattle. That's still a very, very tough division. But they showed last year with Austin Davis and Sean Hill as their quarterbacks, like on and off, and a top 5 or 10 defense, that you're not just chalking that down as an easy win, which at the end of the day is like that's improvement from what they have been in recently. So I'd like to trade for them, not immediately, but if Foles continues to develop, and if they get any semblance of a better offensive coordinator, because they're
Brian Schottenheimer last year?
Yeah. Jeff Fisher teams have never been overly robust on offense, so that may be asking a lot. But if they get their act together and really commit to Foles and the plan with him, and planning to surround him with better offensive weapons and even a half decent offensive line, he's shown he can get you to the playoffs. He's a good enough player.
The question is too, do they really need to be good next year? I think they're more concerned, like you said, about his development, and if they see good things and weed out some of the bad stuff and take a loss in the process, so be it. I think they're aiming to be a better team in the long run and not just going for the quick fix.
but the NFL is a league where it shows that you can be
Turn around
You
quickly.
can turn
Yeah.
around in an off season. Maybe if
The
you're
hard-
not
the
if you're
hard
not
thing is
the
sustaining
worst
it.
if you're not the worst team in the league, then it's more realistic to turn yourself around. But if you're a team that's maybe 1 or 2 games under 500, then it's very possible for you to turn it around and have a very, very good record the following season. So I wouldn't be surprised if their ownership and the management is looking for more significant improvement in the wins column. They may not get it next year, is what I'm saying, but it's.
I mean, they want to also have an attractive team, I think, and this is just looking too far ahead. But they want to have an attractive team to pitch to LA when they move there.
I mean, if they move to LA, then
They're trying to pull a Colts,
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Like the owner, not the ownership, but like the GM and Jeff Fisher's not thinking that way. He's not thinking like, oh,
Right.
we need to have a appealing team to like all the
and
LA
I
hipsters,
don't think I think that's like the problem they have with this town. Like you have an old owner who's putting down. If not, you're right. Not telling Jeff Fisher, but like sitting down mentally, we want to be competitive for next year and whatnot. And again, cross-sport comparison, but like that's the same thing happening with the Tigers now in baseball. We're just going all out because the owner feels like he has maybe like 5 to 10 years left, and just like he wants to see one more title, and like so be it. Whatever the future of the franchise is, just go all out now. Granted, it's not the same thing, and there's no, at least that's been proven. He said it himself. We have no proof of this with the Rams in LA, but it seems like they would want it. If they're moving football back to Los Angeles, they probably don't want a 3-13 team. Coming there.
I mean, I don't think anyone would say they're a 3-13 team.
Well,
Despite that division, they're not a 3-13.
Right.
They're
But a couple wins,
8-8.
a couple
8-8
losses,
is probably more of a realistic end result for them. Because remember they gave up a couple draft picks. Also, they sent those draft picks to the Eagles. Like Nick Foles is viewed as the higher commodity in this trade, so they're gonna miss out on a couple of potential players they could have from this upcoming draft. We don't know how many picks exactly yet, but I mean so. We've spent about 5 minutes too long on the St. Louis Rams,
and we didn't even finish the Eagles.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we're still not like talking about but talking about
this has been one of the craziest weeks in recent memory.
They've given up their three highest producing players on offense.
I guess start talking about Jeremy Maclin.
Jeremy Maclin is the third one. There are other receivers. Who are they? Chris Matthews. Who else? Jordan Matthews. I've done this on multiple podcasts where I've just basically anyone with the last name Matthews, Johnson, Jones, or anything like that. I just mess up their first names, but whatever. They still have the draft coming up, and Jeremy Maclin I think is a bit more of a forgivable, free agent.
I didn't have a problem with that. I think they got priced out, and he's a great player, but he's not someone I want to be paying $11 million a year.
I mean, I feel like he's really going to struggle to force his way into that Kansas City team. They have so many great receivers.
So, speaking of stat, apparently he had about 300 yards less receiving than the entire Kansas City receiving core.
Less? I thought you were going to say more.
No, but I mean, that's still pretty ridiculous. He had 1,300 yards. They had something like 1,588 total as a group, and he had, of course, 10 touchdowns, and they had none.
None of their wide receivers caught a touchdown. That is, I can't even fathom that. I'm a Ravens fan, and I can't fathom that. We invented poor quarterback play for the first,
You guys had that month
10 years of our existence
where you scored no offensive touchdowns.
Yeah, for 6 games. That was bad. But, I mean, obviously, the defense...
It was an all-time defense, though. I remember Week 17, I was watching the Chiefs play, and I think it was Bo that caught a touchdown, and it was a holding penalty. And I was so distraught for a second. And it's not even because they're a divisional rival. I just found it hilarious that a team could go a whole season without it. So I was pretty excited when they called that one back.
Kansas City's also Jeremy Macklin's hometown team.
Yeah, right, because he went to Missouri,
Went to Missouri. You're getting paid to play for your hometown team. I understand why you'd leave. And I understand why Philly would let him leave. But where they haven't been paying for on offense and what they've basically entrusted Chip Kelly to do and find low costing skill position players, and I guess Sam Bradford. he's the highest paid player on their offense now.
We have 15 mils.
Which I wouldn't say is the makings of a great offense, but okay. But they've transferred all that money, pumped it into their defense. They've managed to get Byron Maxwell from the Seahawks to sign with them. He signed for 6 years, $60 million, which, if not for a certain other cornerback that we're going to talk about later, it would be probably one of the highest paid defensive backs in league history. I'm just going to give my 2 cents. I feel like any Seahawks cornerback or member of their secondary, I feel like you can't value them too high unless it's Earl Thomas or Richard Sherman, and there's a reason they're staying there. So I'm not too big of a fan of that. I understand that cornerback has kind of turned into like one of the hottest positions, or like one of the most necessary positions to have star players and have just players with very good fundamental skills at the position. But I still find it really, really, I find it hard to justify paying a cornerback $10 million a year.
So we see this also,
unless he's Champ Bailey or Deion Sanders. Like, come on.
Yeah, we see this in a lot of championship teams, like both of the Ravens ones, for instance, where they're, or I guess Seahawks won it last year, where supplemental parts of that defense get treated as elite players for having been part of like a championship team,
right,
of an all-time defense, and they get paid as much as like a better
Corey Grant
guy, yeah,
Ravens. That
perfect
was the first
example.
one that came to mind.
Or even now with this, we saw Donnell Ellerbe, who's already going to get released.
Paul Kruger. Yeah, you can go over.
So it happens a lot, and Byron Maxwell's obviously a good player, but yes, like you said, he's definitely a product of playing in Seattle, and I feel like the counter argument to this could be like he dealt with more throws because he isn't Richard Sherman, but he had the benefit of having the safety net of Cam Chancellor, of Earl Thomas over the top, and like. He's great. We know Chip Kelly wanted a big corner, and he got one. He's 6'2", I believe.
Yeah.
But they overpaid, for sure. I don't think it's a criminal overpay. I don't even think it's a contract they'll necessarily regret. But he got more money for being part of that Seahawks team. I honestly think if he were on, say, like the Jaguars and had the same level of talent, we wouldn't see him getting, $660 with a big guarantee. And they'll like having him. They got rid of Kerry Williams and and Bradley Fletcher, so those guys were kind of awful. We saw them a lot in prime time, just getting toasted this season.
But even like the best cornerbacks, you're automatically at a disadvantage in this league. It's such a passing league.
Yeah, you can't touch anyone anymore.
You can be the best at your craft as a cornerback and still get toasted once a game, and for that I can't justify paying someone $10 million a year for that. I personally only think you have to be the best or second best, like an elite level at your position to get paid that much, or it has to be someone who's almost elite at a position like left tackle or quarterback or a pass rusher. Those are the ones that I think it's understandable if you're willing to lock down your 15 sack a year pass rusher than your 1,000-yard, 100 reception receiver, or your 6 or 7 interception cornerback, because it's just the whole replaceability factor.
Well, yeah, and
replace those guys.
I agree with that too in terms of if you can find cheap talent there for that's marginally worse and far more inexpensive, why not do that? The one thing, and I'm not defending this move by saying it, it's just something that may come into play, is we're seeing with the TV contract every year with the cap going up, this may be a deal that benefits.
It'll dilute,
and these deals may not look as bad as in hindsight. Of course, if you look at it that way, it kind of also defeats the benefit of the cap going up. If you're adjusting deals for that, you want to just do it to the current market and then be saving going forward. Like you said, it'll be interesting to see what the Eagles do at quarterback. If they keep Bradford, do they sign him after this year, restructure him to a lower deal? Because a lot of teams we see that have like a lot of cap space, it's because they don't have a quarterback under a massive contract, right? Like the Raiders, Jaguars, the Dolphins. All these guys are guys with teams with quarterback on their rookie deal. Even the Colts. So, Chip Kelly wants to make this, like you said, a defense-first team, and make the offense be a part of the system, and people are interchangeable. And we're, like you said, it's too early to make a read on either way. We're gonna find out, but it's gonna be interesting as hell to see how it plays out.
Another good way to put it is last season, if you took the Eagles' 5 best players, you put them on a chalkboard, they'd probably be in no particular order: McCoy, Macklin, Foles. Who were their defensive players last year? They don't really have any brand names or very, very solid players on defense last year. So you could probably sprinkle in a couple other offensive guys. Like all of their high skill or like most talented players were on the offensive side of the ball. And Chip Kelly's basically just said, I don't need that for this offense to work. Let's pump the talent into our defense, improve our defensive showings and our defensive ability, so that we limit our points conceded, and my offense will still produce maybe not right off the bat exactly what they were doing last year, because they were a pretty great offensive team last year with all those pieces. He's basically like, I can take Sam Bradford and some rookies and I guess whoever else they sign at free agency, and we can get 20 to 25 points a game. We just need a defense that can hold someone to 17.
So they still got that offensive line in place with Evan Mathis, who I was surprised they were considering trading, but it looks like they pulled him back off. Jason Kelsey. They both had injuries last year, but when they came back, they were great. So they have the core, at least, of what protected their offense and made it look good. So we'll see if it works. Like there's no quick answer.
I mean, long story short, do you think keeping in mind that they still have the draft to go through, and Chip's gonna have a couple hits and misses in the draft offensively. Do you think they're better off now, or do you think they're going to be better off going into this following season than they were last season?
Into this season, no.
Okay.
Going forward, I think they will be. Long run, even we might see results.
I even think this season, I think they're better. They're better off.
So?
Like LaShawn was obviously, I think he put up 1,300 yards on the ground or something. He was pretty good, but I don't know. I trust him. I trust Chip.
Well, yeah,
Chipmas. In Chip, they should
How
trust.
long did you have that one up your sleeve?
Literally 10 minutes before I walked in here, I was like, Chipmas. I like that. That's going to be my corny joke of the day this week. So
yeah, I definitely. So we agree definitely on that. That we think he's making more or less the right moves, and that we trust. Yeah, I agree with you that I feel like I trust Chip Kelly. Like I said, I think where I differ from you is I don't necessarily think this year will be a step forward. I think there's too much of an adjustment period and too many unknowns. But overall, I like the moves. But yeah, I'm definitely higher on the Bradford trade than you. We both thought Macklin letting him go was fine, and we both see the pluses of the Shady trade.
The other team that's done pretty well, when a couple days ago I was gonna say that they were probably in trouble, is Detroit. They let Ndamukong Suh go, which he's a polarizing player, but you got to give it to him. He's a hell of a player.
Absolutely.
He can make one or two plays that turn the game on its head. He can get you a timely sack here or stuff a run. They let him go to Miami, 6 years, $114 million. That's ungodly money.
$60 million guaranteed.
Yeah, that's. I wouldn't have matched that if I was them. So, and then they've managed to my surprise, replace him with Haloti Ngata from the Ravens.
So I've been meaning to ask you how you felt about that, aside from the obvious emotional letdown.
Yeah, the emotional toll is from this offseason. It happens not to this extent every year, but it's pretty heavy emotional toll. But just every time I feel this way about the Ravens, I just sit there and I just remind myself, In
Ozzie
Ozzy,
Newsome?
in Ozzy
Yeah.
we trust. Ozzy till we die. You know, like he's
You want to talk about a guy track record? He's got it.
he knows what he's doing, and you can't justify it. You just have to take the shame from Steelers fans or whoever wants to throw at you like, oh yeah, your whole team's falling apart. Torrey Smith's gone. Like Haloti Ngata's gone. Like I don't care. I love them. They're great players, but I'm not paying like Haloti Ngata. I think we're pulling. You could argue we're pulling a Patriots kind of move of getting rid of someone like a Vince Wilfork a year before rather than a year later. You know, 'cause it's. And Haloti could have a great season this year. Like he could, and I hope he does. I hope he plays well and he earns he plays up to his potential and earns the money that he's gonna get, because we did have him signed to a decently sized contract. And as we go forward more and more into that Flacco deal, we're slowly owing Flacco more and more year after year. And like obviously we're smart enough to know that was going to be a hit, but I think as our team has changed, also they thought, like the Ravens have thought to themselves, we know how to draft defensive line guys. It's okay if we let Pernell McPhee go. He went to the Bears on, can't remember how exactly much, but that's a pretty big, not blockbuster signing, but it's a pretty big signing for us and them. But Ozzy knows he can find guys that he likes to fill the holes in the defensive line, and he can find guys to fill in for Torrey Smith. So in Ozzy we trust. We'll move forward. Detroit comes out of this winners. We come out of this with uncertainty. Miami. Well, all we can do is wait. Do you think?
Yeah.
You think
I mean, I
it's a
don't
good
even know
deal
where
or
to
no?
start on this. I think, so to sum up the Nada one real quick, I was talking to Rahul earlier today, who we had on one of these pods.
Yeah.
And he was saying something along the lines of what you were saying as well, he's a Ravens fan, that they were going to have to end up cutting Nada anyways, and at least this way they got 2 picks out of him, a 4th and a 5th. Like that's going to be dead money on the cap either way. At least they were able to send him somewhere and
We can actually do a lot more with I'm not saying it's certain that we're gonna get hits with the 4th and 5th round picks, but I trust us to find contributors.
no
in
one
the
does
4th or 5th
defensive
round.
depth like the Ravens do.
Yeah, like I feel better with 2nd and 3rd round picks. If you offered me a 1st round pick or a 2nd and 3rd round pick, I'd take the 2nd and 3rd, because the Ravens, we've just proven with that volume of picks in a very similar position, we can get good players. We can find
That's where you get your great values too. You know?
exactly. But
Your top
4th and
level
5th
guys.
round is just kind of bordering there, where and maybe we could parlay that into moving up from the 4th or 5th round and getting something in the 2nd or 3rd by giving up those picks. So I don't know. A lot is going to change. So
Yeah, the thing with Nada, if just on a personal level, I'm happy he's gone for one reason and one only, which is that I don't have to see these atrocious Royal Farms commercials.
we don't get them in
Anymore.
Montgomery County.
Really?
I've never seen them.
Okay, well,
I'll watch it later, but
lucky.
I'm sure.
We'll definitely give those a watch after.
Baltimore-based
Yeah,
listeners will know what you're talking about.
They're so bad, I can't even say they're entertainingly bad.
Well,
But
do you get the Eastern Motors commercials?
no,
At Eastern Motors, your job's your credit.
they always for that plug. Those were the best growing up.
See, you give up. I give up the Royal Farms commercials, but I get the Eastern Motors commercials, which are probably as bad. If I'm
The lip sync on those, I remember the Clinton Portis ones that they had a rush to make when he got traded here.
right. Poor Bradley Beal's doing those now.
I saw that one. I have seen, but I think I was at a friend's place when I saw it. But yeah, I mean, Nada was a big guy here. Fans loved him, but you know, they, like you said, a year early is a lot better to miss 1 year of productivity than to be on the hook for a massive contract, dead money, especially when you want to have a perennial title contender. Same thing with Pernell McPhee, another guy coming off a good defense, while a good player, extremely versatile. They let him walk and get overpaid. They weren't going to match that, and that's fine. They'll find someone else, turn him into a system guy if they have to, or use that money to reward their own guys like they did with Flacco. Similarly, I guess, we want to talk Baltimore. I'm more than fine with the move to let Torrey Smith go. I think he's a great player, but definitely the kind of guy that, the Ravens can find someone comparable, whether through the draft or free agency. We'll give him most of what Torrey did, if not all, at a fraction of the cost, which isn't necessarily what you want, but that money can be spent also elsewhere. And I question that move for him going to the Niners. I'm not sure Colin Kaepernick is the guy I want throwing me passes, especially. Again, there's so much to talk about with the Niners, but the way that team's going, I'm not sure I want to be there.
This is probably the first time I've ever given an outlook other than the Ravens first, but for the Niners, I actually love that pick for the Niners because exactly what Torrey Smith did for us is exactly what the Niners need. They haven't had a deep threat these past 4 years. Who would be their deep threat? Michael Crabtree people, they drafted thinking he was going to be that, but I feel like he's more suited to like a possession receiver. He's very similar to Anquan Boldin in that he's not overly athletic, but he's a big physical receiver with very solid hands, unless Richard Sherman's on him.
I was about to say, I just find him to be so mediocre, like Sherman said. Mediocre is so descriptive.
Yeah, no, I mean,
he's not
love or hate
shitty,
Richard Sherman. Love or hate Richard Sherman. That's a pretty good assessment of him. Like, I just people hyped Crabtree coming out of college to be like the second coming of Jerry Rice.
I thought he was going to be better than Des Bryant. Both of those guys. I used to watch a lot of Big 12 football back then, and I was way higher on Crabtree than Des. And what's that game? Was it Texas Tech? Texas.
But Des had the athleticism factor, which trumps all in the NFL. If you're athletic like that, Torrey Smith has the same thing. Torrey Smith he's the fastest guy in the field. Like, just send him on a go route, and then you automatically have 10 yards more offense to work with on any given down with him going
I just
deep.
wonder how he's gonna. And like, I get what you're saying that you like the move for the Niners. I wonder how it's gonna work out for him because Kaepernick has a great strength on his arm, but he only has one velocity, which will affect Torrey the rest of the team.
Yeah, he doesn't have that moonshot yet.
Yeah,
Flacco has.
He lacks a touch. He's definitely. Sure, he's mobile as hell. I mean, I'm pretty low on Kaepernick as a player in general. But with Torrey Smith as their number one guy and no credible receiving threats, like, teams will be able to, stick their top guy on him.
They have credible receiving threats. They're going to have Vernon Davis coming back.
Vernon blows now, right?
He played badly, but, like, you can't just say he's going to drop off and be a bum.
In the league, though. Like, not as much as the tight end position. One that comes to me is Mercedes Lewis with the Jaguars.
But he wasn't performing at the level that Vernon Davis was.
He was a good player. And I know you like Vernon because he's a Terp.
He's a Terp.
But players do have these just drop-offs sometimes. And, again, players also have, the breakout seasons where they are great. So it's hard to tell. But a lot of the routes with Vernon Davis, a lot of the drop balls, it seems like his game's starting to fall apart. Granted, he doesn't have, in a way, working with an Alex Smith is better for a Vernon Davis than Kaepernick.
Yeah, than with Kaepernick, because... but, I mean, Crabtree's still there, is he?
He's a free agent, so they're not going to keep him.
Yeah. Crabtree and Torrey Smith, I'm not comparing them as players, but I feel like they're the kind of guys, like, at their position right now, they are going to get paid.
Sure.
So to bring him back, who would you rather have?
I'd much rather have Torrey Smith.
Exactly. Torrey Smith has caught touchdowns in
Super Bowls,
important playoff games, and he's changed games by himself.
I'd much rather have Torrey Smith. There's so many holes in San Francisco now. That's what they've gone through in the last month. Has been crazy. I guess we can start chronologically, try and run through this real quick. They offered Adam Gase the job. He was the coordinator for the Broncos, and he was about to accept it. And they said, but you have to take on Jim Tomsula. And he said, no thanks. So they're like, okay, well, we'll offer him the job. Do you want to be his offensive coordinator? And recently he said, hell no. You just pulled the rug out on me.
I just said I didn't want to have him when I was a head coach.
A quote defensive-minded coach that, defensive players like Justin Smith might retire. Patrick Willis retiring this week was shocking,
okay.
He lost.
I mean, I had that. I had that listed like more of the end because that was kind of a somber topic, but we can bring that up now.
Yeah.
That and just kind of do a general sort of like Niners state of the franchise kind of thing because like you said, there's a lot of holes. There's plenty to talk about with that. If Torrey Smith had gone there for ungodly money, I have here he went 5 years, 40 million.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's
About
a
what he's
lot.
worth.
That's a lot. Like it wasn't. It's what he's worth, but I guess to the Ravens, it wasn't worth bringing him back for that, and he kind of felt like his time here was like coming to an end.
It seemed that way from what he said
like,
as well. That was a great thank you letter he wrote.
Yeah, there was like rumors he was going to leave and everything, but I don't think he decided where he was going to. So that I don't have an issue with him going there for that money. Like if the Ravens had the option to sign him for that amount, then I would have said maybe we should have done it. But it looks like he was ready to go. So the Niners bring him in, 5 years, $40 million. He gets to stretch the field for you on offense, but you have a big, strong-armed quarterback.
It seems Anquan Bolden played a role in recruiting him as well, which makes sense. Former teammates.
And when it comes to the rest of it, we just can't know. Justin Smith retiring, Patrick Willis gone. People are treating it like he's dead. Like you're seeing stuff like that looks like he's going to be in the Memoriam montage at the ESPYs this year. It's pretty bad actually. The dude has just had like a couple of smaller injuries, and he just. Another thing I've kind of heard is that he just seems fed up with the 49ers.
It's stunning, right? Like he's 30, he's 8 years in the league and just done. But good for him for walking away now at least.
He was seriously the next Ray Lewis.
Right, so yeah, Ray Lewis has even said himself at the end of his career, he was like, the best linebacker in the NFL is wearing 52. He's just on the Niners right now. And, it was like passing the torch, so to speak.
Patrick Willis used to call him Mufasa. I mean, obviously that's from The Lion King. Like,
I didn't know that.
He did that, but like he looked up to Ray Lewis so much that like, and I guess I don't think he let the comparisons get to his head. Like I think it was pretty realistic to call him that. To compare him to Ray Lewis.
I did not know that at all. Huh.
But like for Ray to like welcome him calling him that, and like for that to even be a thing, it just speaks to how. Again, I don't want to like, compare it to death or anything like everyone else is doing it, but it is a really disappointing. Like he was my favorite like defensive player on any team other than the Ravens. He was
right. Who wouldn't like watching Patrick Willis play? He was amazing against the run, amazing against the pass. Just do it all player.
And his value started to get, I guess, underestimated a little bit because he was next to like, if not as good, slightly less good version of him. Navarro Bowman he had 1 or 2 seasons where he was playing at an absolutely elite level. So I maybe it could have people could have been even more like crazy about this whole thing if he had just been playing by himself for the past 5 years at middle linebacker on like a relatively bad defense, and he had just been putting up like incredible stats of like 160 tackles or something like that. But
I mean,
regardless, I'm wondering whether I don't know what the legal implications of this are, like what he would be able to do, but I'm wondering if he's retiring and if he would ever consider coming back.
No, he seems like he could take a couple years off. I'm not entirely sure either. I know in the NBA, if a team has the rights, they have them. And I think this is what applies, if I remember correctly, with Deion. It happened with the Ravens, where he was trying to come back to the Raiders, so the Ravens had to procedurally waive him after he'd been away from the game. The Chargers put in a claim on him, so he couldn't go to the Raiders, and that was the end of it. So I think the Niners would retain his rights, especially since he's taking home some of the guaranteed money, and it seems like they're not going to pursue it, which they could if they wanted to.
Right.
So I would think the Niners, they don't seem like they'd stand in the way if he'd want to go somewhere else. Maybe he needs time away from the game, we don't know. But the Niners would own his rights. It's really all bad news for the Niners. Like, we were talking about all the things that went wrong, and we didn't even cover that mess with Harbaugh, which was just a total disaster.
We can talk about that.
That's its own story.
That's pivotal to what they're doing right now.
You're saying in terms of overhauling the whole thing?
It feels like an overhaul.
We even heard a couple nights ago that they were looking into trading Kaepernick and just keeping it quiet. So, the Eagles, going back to the Eagles, I don't want to rehash everything. That was a guy, to be looking at Colin Kaepernick and Sam Bradford instead, that seems a little, weird to me if, what kind of guy they want in their offense. And that's maybe why people are thinking Bradford's bait. But, yeah, the Niners just decided the guy who took him to, 3 straight playoff appearances with the NFC Championship games, including a Super Bowl that came down to the last throw. And I guess just total clash at the top.
That Jim Harbaugh, that decision to let him go, if not, it felt kind of like a coup, the management was just kind of like, we're done with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get out of here. And like, obviously he's a great coach, so he had people lining up to hire him, so it felt like they could play it off as, oh, it's my decision to go coach at my alma mater and everything like that. Like, so it's fine for the media, in the media perspective. But is that one of the 5 dumbest decisions by a franchise, like, in the NFL this decade? I mean,
to be honest with you, I'd have to
of like getting
think about
rid
that more.
of getting
But
rid of someone.
It seemed pretty weird. Like, I'll be totally level with you. I'm not as high on Harbaugh as most people because, like, one of the things I take huge issue with is both play selection and especially clock management. And his was relatively poor this year. But regardless, he was, like you said, one of the best coaches in the NFL. He suited that team very well, brought them up to like an incredible standard. He got every last ounce out of the Niners team and probably made him much better, overperform. He got, Kaepernick, a guy they took in the second round. They made it 1 year to the NFC title game with Alex Smith and decided, you know what, we can do it with our backup guy. And they made it work. Like you said, it had to be a coup with Trent Baalke as a GM and with Jed York and ownership. They must have just clashed with him so hard that they decided we will force him out by any means. It's like you said, it's dumb. They replaced him with a guy who, essentially with Tom Sula, like we said, Adam Gase turned down a head coaching job because he didn't even want to coach alongside with him. Right. We have players who, this guy is reportedly a player's coach, don't want to play for him.
Here's the thing,
strange.
Jim Harbaugh is also kind of a player's coach. Like, everywhere he's been like such a huge personality. And that personality, I mean, I feel like it, for the most part, is that he gets along very well with his players. But there are certain times where if you don't get along with him, or like if you don't match up with him and like your personalities don't fit, then he will just completely reject you. And I feel like there have been kind of like a couple of instances of that, of like him being a little bit too like aggressive or like wound up, something like that, where it's like rubbed some of his players the wrong way. Because like some of the players this past season, this is terrible for my credibility, but I can't remember any of their names. There were reports of like this bad locker room morale this entire season. And for a team that some people were pegging after that Super Bowl run as a team that could have like owned the NFC for like for this rest of this decade, it just feels like they left a lot on the table. Like they had everything from top to bottom in every single position.
It's definitely a strange time to pull the plug.
Yeah. So it's the Patrick Willis retirement thing, I think, is what we're going to remember as the official, like you said, pulling of the plug. Because it wasn't even that management did it. It's that management started it by getting rid of Harbaugh, and the players pretty much like showed what their thoughts on it were by retiring. When has that ever happened before?
Yeah,
Patrick Willis,
age 30,
one of the top 5 linebackers in the league, and Justin Smith, one of the top defensive linemen in the league. Like that's insane. So I mean, who knows what happens with the Niners? I think their offense might look a little bit better next year.
Well, one of the bright spots is I really like the way Carlos Hyde played for them in limited stretches last year.
Very true.
And I think he's the kind of guy who they can, in a league where running back roles are getting split up a little more.
He's the kind of guy that someone's going to spend $40 in fantasy on this year.
I was thinking that myself because he will get an RB1 type workload. So we'll see what happens there. He seems like he's good going forward. Chris Borland's another guy, young, who they can just slide in or to not, replace Patrick Willis, but take on that role and hopefully grow into it. The guy that he's played well last year, and they're hoping, even though he's a little undersized, that he can fill that role for them and be a dominant defensive player. And of course, like you said, signing Torrey Smith to a team that has been consistently receiver deficient was a smart move for them. I guess, going back to where we were before that led us all here, with Baltimore, it seemed like almost like a three-way trade, except nothing going the Ravens' way so far.
We get picks.
Well, right, but I'm saying with Nada to Denver, Sue to Miami, and it's almost like I'd like to see something go from Miami to just to make it
so
a
you mean
triangle.
officially, like a Miami didn't send them anything. Okay.
So we know.
I don't think there's anything Miami has that we want.
Well, Donnell Ellerby, if you want him back,
No, hell no. CJ Mosley.
Yeah. But yeah, the Detroit did, I guess, well for themselves in that they at least somewhat replaced Sue, and not as a great player, but he's definitely not, the wrecking force that Ndamukong Suh is. He'll hold that line together and be what makes it work. Sue's, a guy every down, like, whether it's run or pass, he's going to affect the play. And take up an extra lineman. As long as, Nada's not doing that anymore. They had him more in a tackle, even an end roll sometimes, as opposed to the nose tackle he usually plays.
Yeah, I don't entirely agree with you.
Okay.
Man, I don't entirely. This is gonna sound super flaky, but I don't entirely disagree with you either. Obviously, like, you wouldn't put them on the same boat as, like, the kind of person who's just gonna overpower their run blocker their blocker every down, and has the potential to get to the quarterback or get to the running back every single down. But Nada's still I feel like he's a lot more patient, and because of his experience, he knows the downs or I guess it's part of the scheme where his job is to sit back a little bit more and maybe pressure his blocker, but he understands that it's the edge rusher's job to get to the quarterback. It's his job to stay there and plug the hole and make sure that if the pocket collapses, that quarterback's not getting out of it and running for a first down, which he's the most athletic defensive lineman I have ever seen before. That's not counting
more than JJ?
Pass rushers.
Okay.
Pass rushers now, they're such a different breed. They're
absolutely
they're absolute monsters. They're 6'5" guys with long arms and
4.6 40s.
Yeah, they could play linebacker or defensive line. I'm talking about defensive tackles. He is the most athletic, more than Sue, I think.
Well, I know on some level at least you're gonna enjoy watching that Lions defense because I know you liked watching them last year. You talked up the Lions a lot. You called, how they'd be good, and they were great, especially against the run last year. And at least, not you have a guy, obviously you'd rather see him in Ravens colors, but someone you've watched for.
I can't say it's a good move, but I can't sit back and I can't criticize Ozzie. I just can't do it.
What do you think for Miami? That's a lot of money. And Ndamukong Suh is a transcendent player, but that's a lot of money to throw at someone.
You're Miami and you have an empty stadium every Sunday. You just have trouble drumming up fan support. You have no stars. You're in a division that's been dominated by the Patriots, and you're thinking to yourself, this Patriots thing has to end sometime, which is probably what people have been thinking the last 5 years. But obviously it hasn't happened. But Brady's 38 now. This is the only way I can rationalize what they're doing, is that they're getting their star and they're getting themselves, they're loading up to start winning a couple division titles. And I don't think it's the right way of doing it, but I think that's the reason they've got someone like Ndamukong Suh and why they dropped so much money on Mike Wallace a couple seasons ago. And it's I wouldn't spend that much money. I probably wouldn't even bother with him because of the polarizing things he's done. But if you're someone like Miami, or if you're Cleveland, Oakland.
I was waiting for
Oakland. You just have to take a chance on a guy like that. I feel he actually might have even been a really good fit in Oakland.
Well, and that's the thing. I guess I'd love to talk about the Raiders. One of the things you mentioned, I guess the only thing worse than overspending on a guy is perhaps not overspending and being stuck with just nothing. And that's
at least you tried.
Yeah, it's kind of been Oakland's situation with $56 million in cap room and no Ndamukong Suh to show for it, no Julius Thomas, not even a DeMarco Murray. Again, these last two guys I'm not nearly as high on, but
you have a running back called Murray.
That's Thank you, Alex. I wonder if they're related.
It's
Can we
too
call him
easy.
Skip Bayless?
It's too easy.
And he wears the same number too, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
It's confusing.
So, the Raiders have struck out on free agency. They couldn't even get Mike Iupati, another guy who left the Niners, actually.
Right. That for Arizona.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, it's been frustrating. The last draft class was pretty good with Derek Carr and, of course, Khalil Mack. And that's, part of building a team. You can afford those free agents because you got guys at low cost. But if you're striking out free agency, at some point, like you said, maybe it's better to at least overpay a guy, have fan interest, attract other players. It's just than having, like $45 million sitting in cap room and then having to overpay someone like a second tier guy like Jermaine Gresham or one that's just gonna, not do anything for your team. And the Jaguars seem to be doing a better job of this. Obviously Florida has the advantage of no state tax, but they just got Julius Thomas to that deal, which something like 5 years, $46 million, I believe.
It had to be.
Yeah.
To convince him to leave
Denver,
one of the best offensive in the league to go to Jacksonville. Have you been to Jacksonville? I mean, I've driven through Jacksonville, and there's nothing going on there. It's just... Evidently, I've driven through Jacksonville, so I know everything there is to know about Jacksonville. But, I don't know. I just... Either... Yeah, you're Julius Thomas, and you decide to sign for Jacksonville, and they don't even know who their quarterback is going to be.
I mean, it's probably be Bortles, and they made a nice move bringing Jared Alger, too.
But they're, maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe you'd rather not know who your quarterback is going to be than have Blake Bortles.
I'm not high on Bortles at all. I wasn't high watching him last year. I was very low on him. I could not believe that he was being discussed, at times as the number one pick. I didn't even think he was close to a first-round talent, but that's my opinion. But I think what Jacksonville is trying to do here is now with the new ownership, with Shad Khan coming in, he owns the owner of Fulham Football Club as well. He's had them play like that one game here,
well.
and already got relegated. But I think he's another guy who's thinking long term. It hasn't necessarily paid off with either of these two, but he brought in Gus Bradley, who was the architect of that Seattle defense. He seems willing to give him time to let him deal with losing seasons, and they're slowly building up talent there. Trying to pick up cheap guys, get their own guys, and get something going. They haven't played all their cards right.
You said they're trying to get cheap guys, but they just dropped $46 million.
Well, and that's where it gets interesting.
Tight end.
Yeah. Well, I think what they're trying to do is draft who they can, pick up guys that like Bradley likes cheap, and now plug in these holes with that $60 million of cap. Like they can afford to pay a guy like Julius Thomas if they find an expensive talent. Again, it hasn't gone perfectly because they overpaid for Toby Gerhart last year. So. That is the risk when you overpay.
How much did someone spend in our fantasy league for Toby Gerhart?
I think it's like $17.
Why?
Yeah.
Man, I don't understand. He. The one thing I'm confused about with this decision is the jury is still out for me on Julius Thomas as to whether he's a receiver or receiving threat that will make his quarterback better, or if he's the kind of guy that is made better by Peyton Manning.
Yeah, and we're about to find out. I mean,
like Demaryius Thomas, I feel like he's earned his reputation.
He survived the Tebow era.
Right. He's earned his reputation as, like, you could plug him into any team and he'd be the number one guy probably and a dominant wide receiver. But there's certain other guys on there, like Eric Decker, the jury's still out on him as to whether he's a 1,000-yard guy consistently. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't wish the Jets quarterbacks on anyone or any receiver, but and hopefully with Brandon Marshall, who we'll talk about in a bit, like that'll help improve him a little bit. But I'm still not sure that what's difficult about stopping the Jaguars' offense now. Yeah, they have one more guy who's athletic and a very good receiver, but you just double team the tight end over the middle.
Are they going to end up using him as more of a safety valve, in which case it's almost like a waste? Or is Bortles going to start making those downfield throws they drafted him to make? Is he going to be able to get open and prove? He had a major problem with both drops and injuries last year, so they're betting big on him being
only about
touchdown.
It was a little bit more than halfway through the season that the injuries started.
Yeah,
but the season before that, he played the whole year, and then this past season he was on a pace to break the touchdown record before he got injured.
That's the question. Which Julius
And
Thomas?
he's too young to have a reputation as like an injury-prone player.
Well, I think the concern
one
was
injury.
more as being soft in terms of returning from the injury than the concerns about him getting hurt a lot. I don't think it's a terrible move. They had the money. They might as well spend it on him instead of 3 or 4 role players, which they have enough of. Granted, there's some of their starters are guys who would be role players on other teams. So they're hoping a Julius Thomas can be a difference maker and, again, attract more players there. Make it a destination where wide receivers want to play since they have a Julius Thomas drawing, that linebacker, that safety away from them. Hope Bortles shows that he's capable of stepping up.
Maybe convince Justin Blackman to stop being a dumbass.
Yeah, that's another one too, right? They have a lot of receivers that we think of, as a nice piece, like as a second or third receiver, like an Allen Hurns, Allen Robinson. Like either one of these guys needs to step up. Like Blackman was doing great. He's another question mark too, right? It seemed like they like him, but now they're talking to DeMarco Murray. Like his role going forward is going to be interesting. Like you said, Justin Blackman, first round, absolute great talent, who is a dumbass. Like there's no other way to put it. And of course, we love football. We'd love to see him resolve his life issues, but like, if we're talking sports, they need him to get it together. But I guess let's talk about a different team here.
Yeah, the one that came up right before we started recording was Darrelle Revis.
Yeah,
he's going back to play for the Jets, and he is being made the highest paid corner of all time. 5 years, $70 million.
39 guaranteed, right?
Who knows? You're right. I'm guessing you are.
Yeah.
They have the money to spend. They're the Jets. Any move, I think, is a good move.
I like what they've done this offseason between him and bringing in Brandon Marshall. I think it's been 2.
We can talk about both of them.
Yeah.
Brandon Marshall.
But
They gave up a couple draft picks for him. But here's the one I didn't... I say that I like what they did.
Okay.
But I don't like... Why drop Percy Harvin? I understand that he didn't really do anything, but they gave up a couple draft picks to get him.
Well, it was like I think a 5th round pick. Now what it's going to turn into since he didn't make the roster.
Yeah, but it's a draft pick.
I think I don't disagree with you necessarily. The price tag is too high in that he hasn't been a $10 million receiver, and I guess they're worried scheme wise if he's still a fit. But again, personally, I disagree. I think I'd love to see him. With these options, it could make someone like a Geno Smith better. If they draft someone, they have more options to work with. What I would like to see them do was at least attempt to renegotiate that contract into something more of a prove-it deal. Harvin is not worth the first rounder he was traded for, that's for sure, especially with that deal. But if he were willing to renegotiate, I think that'd be a good spot for him. It is strange, right? We see the Jets finally with 2 receiving options and just letting one go. That's kind of been their problem. Even when they were playing those AFC Championship games, they didn't really have those guys they could trust.
Yeah, I need to look closer at their cap situation. I'm sure they have plenty of money to spend because I can't really think of any other players they've got wrapped up in big deals. The one thing I don't like about it is that you're basically putting the status of best player and leader, you're putting that weight on Darrelle Revis and Brandon Marshall, who at this point are veterans, but they're not the kind of veterans you'd want being the guys that are there to mentor and lead your team of young guys who have just come into the league. Am I wrong for saying that?
Right. So I don't necessarily disagree, but I think Darrelle Revis is such a personality and such a force that I think it could work. And he's been in that locker room.
Darrelle Revis is.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that.
I mean, just because he's not, an outspoken.
No, I'm not saying you have to necessarily be like super. You don't have to be Ray Lewis. I'm not like that's. I understand.
I mean, the man is Revis Island. He's.
Yeah, but he's a top guy. He's a top guy at his position. He comes in. He does his job, and I don't feel like the accountability. He's accountable for himself, which in a team game can only take you so far.
Sure, but if you're facing a team with, we were talking about a Niners squad. Just for example, I'm pulling one team out of my ass. A team with a Torrey Smith. You can take Torrey Smith out of that game. That almost eliminates the passing. For the Niners, you want to force the team's priorities to change. That's how those Jets teams were defensively built. Granted, with him, with David Harris, Bart Scott, he wasn't the only player, but they're looking to reestablish some of that. And I love this move for the Jets for a couple reasons as well. They lost out on Darrelle Revis for 2 seasons. They got the number 9 pick, which turned out to be D. Milliner, I believe, for that price. In 2 seasons where, Revis wouldn't have made too much of a difference. Of course, they'd love to have him back. And he's got his ring. It seems more or less that he was doing this contract for whoever gave him the best financial deal, more or less, now that he has that Super Bowl ring. He's getting his guaranteed almost $40 million. And it was pretty smart for the Jets to guarantee that if they know they're in a good financial position, because they don't want to be, in a situation like they were last time where they want to cut him. They know if they want to keep him, why not guarantee that money at least on the front end of the deal? What's the difference between year 2 and year 3? And he's a guy they want to rebuild that defense around with him, with Sheldon Richardson. They just brought back David Harris on that deal. I do think he can be a leader. Brandon Marshall, he's had his conduct issues. Granted, so I agree with you on that. They don't want it to turn into a Santonio Holmes type situation where he's like a year or 2 past his prime, just a big name brought in, and just doesn't do anything. But I think with Revis, he is the kind of guy they want leading that defense.
I just don't think he's a defensive leader. There's certain guys who you tell me the top 4 or 5 defenses in the league, and probably in season, probably not right now, just because football hasn't really been on my mind that much lately. Just over the past week, it's popped back up with all these deals happening. But within the season, I could probably watch a game and tell you that guy, he's the leader of that defense.
Sure.
He's the guy, or like 1 or 2 guys. Like you could watch the Seahawks play, and you can tell by the way, like you can tell by Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman. Sherman probably more so because he is that outspoken, vocal kind type of player in person that they're setting the bar for that defense. I've never really had that feeling with Darrelle Revis. He's a great player, top 3 or 4 in his position, but not the kind of player that I think is someone that you plug in there and he's going to affect more than what it's his job to do. His job is to get in there and shut down the guy across the line from him, and he's doing no more than that.
Well, I get what you're saying. I'll still go back to my argument, which is that by doing that, he shifts the other teams.
Sure, X's and O's wise, that's great. He does what he needs to do X's and O's wise. I'm not disagreeing with you there. But I'm saying if you're paying someone this much money, they got to do a little bit more than that. Like it's a how long is it? It's a 5-year contract.
5 years, 70, yeah.
5-year contract. So 5 years from now, they want to be. I'm guessing somewhere in the next 5 years they want to be competing for a Super Bowl. Am I right?
I mean, that should be the goal.
That's the goal. Like any 5 or 4 year plan should involve getting to a Super Bowl because it's very doable in the league. But having designating Darrelle Revis as your big money guy and defensive leader, I don't think.
We just
I don't
saw
think
the Pats win a Super Bowl with him
plan.
as their defensive guy.
Yeah, because he wasn't their defensive guy. There were plenty of leaders on that team.
Sure, but he was the best player on that defense, unquestionably.
There's a difference though between best player and leader. Who was the best player on the 2012 Ravens defense? Terrell Suggs is the answer. Obviously, Ray was in his last year. Ed Reed was still playing for us. They weren't the best. They weren't at their best, but they were still the leaders. Like, I
don't think that that presence is necessary. Like, they don't need to have like a token Bart Scott in there.
I feel like I'm getting misunderstood to say
okay,
that like
sure, go ahead.
you need to have like the super outspoken Ray Lewis, like you said, Bart Scott or someone like that to rally your defense and everything. But
I just don't have a problem with this deal. I guess we're looking at like Byron Maxwell with $663. This is a year less, sure, and he's getting paid $7 million more. But I'd rather be paying Darrelle Revis his $14 than Byron Maxwell his 10.5. You know, we're comparing corners. You know, they got. I hate to say a bargain at 14
that
million.
I can agree with.
Okay.
Okay, I can agree with you there, because Darrelle Revis is like leaps and bounds better than him.
Yeah.
And I guess it kind of comes down to what you think the kind of effect and role he had in that Super Bowl run for the Patriots.
Well, sure, and I think one thing with Darrelle Revis, another guy I always wanted to be better than him that wasn't. We compare with Nnamdi Asomugha, another guy who was a top corner and changed teams through free agency. Nnamdi was not scheme resistant. Moving from Oakland to
From a man to his
from man to zone in Philly, he got lit up and a lot. He wasn't just a little worse. He was substantially worse, and we've seen 3 teams now. Darrelle Revis just get plugged in, be a shutdown guy, whatever they need him to do. So that's one thing, and obviously with the Jets, they know exactly who he is and what he can do. Even if Rex Ryan isn't there, they know Darrelle Revis, and it's you can't always pay for this, but it is a feel good moment for a franchise that has had far and few in between in the last 5 years, and you can't. I hate to say something like this, you can't underestimate the difference it makes in morale. And it's that first step, that Darrelle Revis, a Super Bowl winner, wants to come back and play for you against the rival. Granted, to him, we throw his term around, he's a little bit in a more mercenary state of his career. He's not, just a guy being like, oh, I want to come home, necessarily. The Jets gave him the best deal. Everything we heard.
For a second there,
yeah.
I thought when you said mercenary, you meant like ring hunter, and obviously he has his rings, so
yeah.
it doesn't matter. But yeah, that does make sense. The storyline I'm actually, I guess the kind of idea I'm very interested in with this Jets team, kind of incorporating bringing Brandon Marshall more into the discussion, is how the Brandon Marshall, Darrelle Revis matchup in practice goes. That doesn't. I mean, sometimes that gets overplayed, and sometimes people just completely disregard it. But you've got a guy who Brandon Marshall thinks he's the best receiver in the league, or thinks he's he needs to be in the conversation with Calvin Johnson, Dez Bryant, and
Antonio Brown now,
Antonio Brown and Demaryius Thomas. He thinks he's that kind of player. I mean, at age 31, obviously the majority of people would argue he's not. His better days are behind him and everything like that. But he's still a very big, physical, soft-handed receiver who, if you turned around and told me on a Sunday afternoon and I had happened to miss the games, oh, Brandon Marshall caught 200 yards today, I would be like, oh, wow. But I would expect it.
Right.
He's still perfectly capable of putting up those numbers.
Where he was, hurt. We didn't even know he was going to play and had 3 touchdowns on a Monday night game or something.
The third factor you need to bring into the whole Brandon Marshall versus Darrelle Revis in practice thing. Again, I don't want to overstate or, I guess, dismiss it. I just want to treat it. I don't want to give it its exact worth. I feel like it's positive to Geno Smith in practice, and he has a number 1 receiver finally. Eric Decker isn't a number 1 receiver. I don't care what anyone says. He rightfully slits into his place as number 2 receiver. So he's got a very good weapon on one side and Brandon Marshall on the other. And every day in practice, I'm sure they're going to be Brandon Marshall and Darrelle Revis are going to be just going at each other. I just feel like that's inevitable. And that makes a player like Geno Smith better. That makes him, if he's got his number 1 receiver going against a number 1 corner, then what's it going to be like on Sundays when he's got his number 1 receiver going against whoever the Bills have to throw at him as in their secondary. Actually, their secondary was pretty good last year, but it's I just feel like this raising the profile of the guys surrounded by you, I feel like that is going to have a better effect on Geno than maybe their own personal leadership. So I feel like I'm kind of contradicting myself.
I get it.
But when you're throwing to Brandon Marshall and you're throwing against Darrelle Revis every day from Monday to Friday, that I feel like you in the back of your mind you're thinking, oh my God, it's my 3rd year here. I haven't done shit yet. I need to raise my game a little bit. If he's not already thinking that, you know. So Jets fans better be absolutely praying that he does, because, I mean, I think you're probably going to disagree with me. Like you said, you think higher on Geno, but I think after this year, if you guys if you're not sniffing the playoff picture, and if you go 6 games into the season and then there's no playoffs for the rest of the year, you just can't, you gotta draft another guy.
Oh no, I don't disagree with you if it doesn't work out. I'm just saying I see a lot of positives in Geno's game. I like to see those, become instead of flashes in the pan, what he regularly does. The one thing I do like is they brought in Todd Bowles from the Cardinals, which had an amazing defense the last couple of years, and I thought that was a quality hire if they felt they needed to get rid of Rex Ryan.
But you could say the same thing about Rex Ryan coming in as the Jets head coach 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
And they made 2 conference title games, so
I mean, but it's kind of,
there's no saying he's Rex Ryan, but
Yeah, I don't know. It's all good if you perform as a coordinator. But and I hate to be a homer here, but John Harbaugh was a freaking special teams coach, and he's one of the best head coaches in the league. So there are plenty of guys who are just coordinator guys. They're in this league. They're going to be coordinators.
I agree with you a lot on that. Guys like Wade Phillips, who just can't cut as a coach, but are great specialists. So I agree with you on your view of that. From what I've seen of Bowles, from his interviews and everything, and what players have said, I'd like to think he could be a great coaching candidate.
Right. There's just no.
We have no way to know until it works out. But I completely agree with you. Some guys are just meant to be head coaches. Some guys just are only useful as coordinators. So, 110% with you there. We were talking about receiving threats. Another guy I want to talk about is Randall Cobb coming back to the Packers. And I guess it's not that surprising. We heard he might get big money. But the Packers, there's one thing they do. It's they draft and they keep their own guys as much as they can. They don't let them leave. And for $440, he got paid, good receiver money to be a slot guy. But he is the premier slot guy in the NFL, and he was a great, even a great red zone threat for them last year.
Well, his role, I mean, I guess he's officially a slot receiver, but you see him utilized in so many different places, as well as with Jordy Nelson. You see them plugging in Jordy, put him in the slot, like have him in motion. They do so many different things with both those guys. They're both so versatile, and they can do all of those things at an elite level that you have to bring him back. I mean, 4 years, 40 it's a great deal for him. But if someone had offered more and he was willing to take it, then you just have to match it if you're the Packers.
Well, so from what we've heard, they did. I know the Raiders were one team that offered $448, and there were a couple more.
But $448 isn't.
I think $2 million. Then that's what you said. Go along with that. $2 million isn't going to make a difference to a player like Randall Cobb, who'd rather win and fit in with the Packers culture. He made the smart decision for himself, turning down $2 million a year. It's a lot to you or me, but it's when you're making $10 million. What's an extra $2 million when you found a perfect place, a team that wants you, that utilizes you that brings out the best in you, and you love playing for them, and you have Aaron Rodgers throwing to you.
I mean, I don't know. Ask Julius Thomas.
The one thing I'll say for Julius Thomas is, he may have seen this as his one chance to cash out. We don't know how much longer Peyton's going to be playing.
Right.
But I agree with you. Randall Cobb's going to be a free agent again at 28 after this deal runs out and might get a cash in one more time.
Very true.
So
he actually might be my favorite free agent signing. And it's boring because he obviously went back to the same team.
I agree with you too. I was so excited for him to be a Raider. I was so hopeful because he's just a fantastic player. And like you said, not a guy you consider, exciting. He doesn't have those light him up plays that Jordy Nelson is good for every other game. But he's just everything you want in a receiver. He's great.
He, if you think about it, compare him to, let's say, Torrey Smith. 5 years, $40 million. Obviously, he's got one more year on the contract, but it's the same amount. That's a steal. Because Torrey Smith, great receiver, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like Randall Cobb is just like that step above Torrey Smith.
Absolutely. And like you said, versatility is key. One game that comes to mind, and someone else we were talking about with Revis, was that amazing Packers-Pats game we saw this year where they would, like you said, just swap wherever Nelson and Cobb were on the field, and they did it perfectly. And credit to Revis, he had a pretty good game other than that one touchdown he got beat for by Jordy. They plugged him into the slot wherever they needed him to cover as well. Randall Cobb is a perfect fit. And one more thing that move does too is it lets them keep a young talent they drafted in Devontae Adams, and keep him as a third receiver, not pressure him to move up, let him keep growing his game, and he's not going to. Teams aren't going to be able to cover all these guys. He's not going to have that much attention. Rodgers already has an excellent rhythm with him, and that offense is somehow going to get better, I think.
I don't know how it affects them re-signing Eddie Lacy in a year or two or whenever they're going to have to re-sign him. But I still think that's the best deal. If they have to let Eddie Lacy go because Oakland or someone like that offers him a huge contract at 25 or 26, then so be it. But the way that offense looks right now, yeah, you're right. There's certainly potential and room to grow.
Eddie Lacy was really the missing piece. The Packers have we talked about this so many different pods that they've always lacked a running back till they found him. He was the perfect fit, not just running, but coming out of that backfield as well. How many times have we seen take a screen pass from Rodgers, who to his credit knows where Lacy's headed, and just rip that into a 30, 40-yard game.
I hadn't really seen him do it at Alabama. He seemed more of a bruising kind of runner guy to me. And you're right. When the first couple times I saw him do it, I was like, oh my God. Thank God the Ravens play in the AFC and we barely ever have to play this team, because you just don't even know where to start with defending and reacting to what that offense is going to do. Credit to the Packers. Great job. One move and your whole offense seems settled, and you can just go about your day, getting your reps in and getting ready for the season. The team that certainly wasn't in, I want to say panic mode, but needed a injection or boost of energy by a move like this was Seattle, bringing Jimmy Graham. That they definitely have seen an exodus of players over these past 2 years as they won the Super Bowl last year, and they've obviously lost guys like Byron Maxwell, who we talked about earlier. They lost
Walter Thurmond,
plenty of other players over the last offseason, and Malcolm Smith is going to be leaving this offseason also.
Percy Harvin, Golden Tate as well. Yeah.
They saw that whole Super Bowl winning team kind of I guess be stripped of a couple of key pieces, but they kept the guys I think they really believe are the ones who make up the core of that team. But as a result, they were just left with zero receiving. Doug Baldwin was their number one receiver. Jermaine Kearse caught the touchdown to win the NFC Championship game and everything, but I think I can speak for all of Seattle when I say you're much more confident on second down of the Super Bowl with 1 yard to go throwing to Jimmy Graham than
Ricardo Luckett.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Jimmy Graham may not have had his best season last year, but plug him into this offense and he changes a lot of things. You retain Marshawn Lynch, pick up Jimmy Graham, maybe try and find a deep threat somewhere in the draft to try and stretch that field a little bit more for those two guys, and they could be back in another Super Bowl.
Well, I don't doubt that they'll be back again. I think the Saints definitely sold low on Jimmy Graham. Like you said, they sold him off his worst years, so to speak, and yet the guy he has started off his career with more receiving yards than any other tight end, Gronk included. He's been one of the most difficult to defend players in the league. He's such a matchup problem. The one thing Seattle has not had, like you said, is a real receiving threat. And Russell Wilson, who can already make magic out of nothing, now has a reliable guy to work the ball to. I think they got him for a low cost. They traded Max Unger, who's a great lineman, but they were considering cutting.
He's like one of the 3 or 4 best centers in the league.
They were cutting.
They definitely gave up. Like, he's a good player.
Yeah, but they were thinking of cutting him anyways because of his cap.
Center's replaceable. I understand. Yes.
And they gave away a first rounder, which is essentially a second round pick, because they're picking at 31.
It's number 31. It's a good pick. Like,
sure, but they're getting back and forth, and they're getting Jimmy Graham. You don't find Jimmy Grahams really in the draft. That's the thing, and you don't want to be spending an early, which they didn't give up. You don't want to be spending an early first rounder when you have to. That's a high cost for a tight end. So they got a guy that a year ago would have been completely untouchable. I really think the Saints are selling somewhat low on this.
They're selling very low on this. They just signed him to a big deal last offseason. And they're saying 1 year in, sorry, we'd rather have Max Unger in the first round.
And the thing about that too is they didn't even sign, like you said, a big deal. But they got substantial savings. Let's not forget that they got lucky in that, the arbitrator ruled for them. And they classified, they have to pay him as a tight end, not a receiver. Graham wasn't able to get the money he wanted. And now he's locked into that deal. Seattle's going to have a few tough cap decisions. But we've seen they can work it before. Even though they're paying for his contract, they're out from Unger's now. We'll see what happens when Russell Wilson's, cap hit goes up from the $1 million it is right now to probably the 22, 23 he'll be making. But that's the thing with Seattle. Especially with Pete Carroll, they find guys who can come in and play and make a difference. And those are guys, we know how the cycle works. They find someone else's trash as their treasure. They work the guy into the system. Someone pays the same guy after they go to the Super Bowl, 6 years, $40 million.
Well, in Jimmy Graham's case, I could say that this is a 50-inch plasma screen TV that someone has thrown out.
Yeah.
Because they forgot to plug it in. Because Jimmy Graham is some pretty good-looking trash. I love the deal for Seattle. I think everyone loves the deal for Seattle. The Saints, I think it shows a trend. If they weren't already trending down, this is definitely...
Well, they're about to be in salary cap hell, too, which is starting a little now. But if you're Drew Brees, you got to be a little...
You're stuck. Yeah. You're stuck there. I mean, it's not terrible. Like, New Orleans is obviously... For NFL players, it's a good place to live. Got a pretty rabid fan base who aren't necessarily on the edge of their seat or quite picking up their picket signs yet to go and protest because they just won a Super Bowl 4 years ago. For a beaten down franchise like that who never really won anything before, they've afforded themselves, and management has afforded itself the flexibility, wiggle room to kind of toy with the roster like this. They're not Cleveland or Detroit or Buffalo or Jacksonville.
Used to that ring buys them a lot of time.
Exactly. So it's
still the NFC South. The 6 wins.
Six wins gets you in the playoffs. So, they're trending down, but you can't count them out yet. You just can't. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft. Maybe they draft their quarterback of the future, let him play behind Drew Brees a couple seasons. It's an important draft for them. It's a franchise defining draft for them.
Absolutely, and it's kind of sad because Brees had Graham. It would have been nice to see him. Drew Brees has done so well throughout his career. Granted, he had a Marcus Colston, who's a nice player, but it would have been great to see him with an elite receiving threat. Someone like you said before, obviously they were going to get a Demaryius Thomas, Dez Bryant type player. See what kind of crazy connection they could have. And at least he had Graham, who was his touchdown guy. Always you knew on the red zone he was throwing to Jimmy Graham, and that ball was finding him no matter what. Brees could put it where no one else would get to it, and Graham would just wrestle that ball out anyways. Drew Brees will be fine, but you'd think he wants that reliability.
Well, people will disagree with me. I think maybe even Patriots fans might disagree with me, but there's certain quarterbacks that I feel like you don't really need those kind of guys. You don't need like a Calvin Johnson or Demaryius Thomas if you're like a Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. Obviously, Peyton Manning has Demaryius Thomas, so great. But I think Drew Brees he's earned the right to be considered in that group in terms of accuracy. He can make Marcus Colston a Hall of Fame considered wide receiver. Colston's the all-time leading receiver for the Saints now. You know, and that is because of Drew Brees. That does not happen if he isn't playing with a Hall of Fame quarterback.
It's just, it's crazy to me. We're talking free agency. It's almost like a full circle with this. Brees was the last, big-time quarterback to change teams when the Chargers kind of discarded him. And we don't see it anymore. I guess that's why we're so shocked now with both a player-for-player trade and 2 starting quarterbacks traded in Foles.
That was kind of that was a strange year in that they already had Phillip Rivers. They'd obviously traded to get Phillip Rivers, and Brees was coming off an ACL tear.
Right, let's not forget Miami had him signed to a deal and then declined it on his physical.
For Dante Culpepper.
Yeah.
Let's go back in the NFL history books and take a look at that one again. Miami's probably kicking themselves over that. So, I won't count out the Saints yet because if they do manage to find a Jimmy Graham-like receiving threat or someone, I guess, even a little bit lower than that, talent-wise, then I feel like their offense still has something to work with. Their offensive problems didn't really have anything to do with their receiving core. It was more to do with their offensive line. That offensive line was junk. Like, their conference rivals were ripping through that offensive line and getting to the quarterback easily. I haven't seen Drew Brees so frustrated for a long, long time. I can't actually think of the last time I've seen him look that frustrated. It's just the thought of knowing you have 2 or 3 seconds to throw the football every single time you snap the ball. That's okay every now and then. Like, obviously quarterbacks understand that, but he's obviously, I think he's like 37.
Something like that. Yeah.
He's not moving teams.
Yeah.
He's staying there. He's staying with the Saints. He's got his ring. He's playing out the rest of his career. So but they got to start thinking about once he leaves. That should be their main concern these next couple of seasons. The Patriots didn't sign Darrelle Revis. They didn't pick up. They didn't match that whole. They didn't pick up his option.
Right. It was essentially designed to almost avoid and force their hand.
Yeah, pretty much. They didn't pick up his option. They didn't pick up Brandon Browner. They didn't keep Brandon Browner. But I think they picked the right guy. They kept Devin McCourty, who is a safety, granted, not a cornerback, but he came into the league as a corner.
Right.
He's a guy you can come up to the line of scrimmage and play bump and run coverage, and he can fill in as a corner. I think they obviously have moved him to safety and they like him there more. But they've signed him to a 5-year, $47 million deal, which I think for what he does and what he can do, I feel like that's better value and for the money that you're spending than 5 years, $70 for Darrelle Revis.
Sure, I mean,
especially because it's the Patriots. Like the Patriots, they can do that, and no one's
gonna. It's a ton of money. But again, we were talking about Revis deal compared to say Byron Maxwell. Like, sometimes the best deals you get are going to be on those top level guys, just because what they can provide is just that much more game changing. And compared to a Denoris Searcy who just signed, I think, with the Titans for something 4 years, 28. Compared to that deal, it would be like $535. You want to be paying those extra $3 million a year over, a replacement player. And that's how I think teams like the Patriots are looking at it. In terms of, we're paying this guy a lot, but market value for a safety is slowly creeping up to $5-6 million just for an average guy. What we're paying is just the $4 million on top of that.
And they don't have to play him at safety. He can cover. He can cover slot receivers. He can cover your number one receiver.
Back. That's the best way to put it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think of him the same way I think of Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas is a bit more of a ball hawk. Like, he has a bit more of a game changing X factor about him.
Right.
But they're just so diverse, and that alone just shoots their value up. And I don't know. I like this deal a lot more than I like the option of them picking up Darrelle Revis' option. And
the thing is, the Patriots have always been creative with the cap as well. And I'm sure they'll find a way, with Revis gone, having that salary cap hole, other than the $5 million, which from his bonus, which they're still going to have to be paying for cap purposes this year, they'll find a way to, restructure someone, front load it, and that money that would have gone to Revis will be open next year, in 2 years, where they can afford, when Brady retires, to just take a massive cap hit there, let Garoppolo develop, and then clear the deck for the next season and be ready to pay guys again. They're smart about how they're going forward with this. I think if they would have kept Revis, they would have almost played it the same way. Been like, we're going to pay you this much, design the deal to have dead money for whenever, keep restructuring until Brady retires, just eat $30 or $40 million in dead cap money then in a season when they're not going to compete, and go for it. That's how they've done it before, and it's worked great for them. Belichick is a master GM and a master coach. I wrote him for going 10 years between Super Bowl wins, or before he got this one. But you know what? This is a guy who was able to rebuild a Super Bowl contender, and 10 years later with just the same quarterback and different pieces all around him, do it again.
Yeah, I think especially with you being a Raiders fan and all, what would you rather have? 10 years of being a non-factor, being chalked up as like an easy win every Sunday, or 10 years of being a team that matters in the NFL?
I hate you.
That is probably that's the biggest asshole comment I've ever made about the Raiders. But I feel like any team or any fan of a team like Buffalo, who are, I'm not saying they haven't been terrible, but they haven't made the playoffs in 15 years. I have it the Patriots fans who complain about anything.
Well, the Patriots have one of the worst fan bases in sports.
Okay. Patriots fans who complain, they're just spoiled. I'm sorry. As a Ravens fan, I thank God every day that I root for a team that matters and is in contention, and that people look at the schedule and they go, "Oh wow, that's gonna be a tough week." That matters to me so much more than getting to the Super Bowl every year and winning 5 Super Bowls.
There's both sides of it. Obviously, you want your team to be good, no question. But what I will say is, and I don't think the Ravens or the Patriots are the best examples of this. Off the top of my head, the best I can go with is the Niners right now. In that the last few years, they were so close, and every time they get their heart broken, so close to
being a flash in the pan isn't great either.
Well, again, yeah. The Niners do have, to their credit, 5 Super Bowl rings, but we're just talking recently. You don't. There is some kind of pain, I guess, that comes with being so close if you're never gonna win it. And they say, winning cures all. Even one ring, Seattle, even if we were ready to almost proclaim them a dynasty if they won this one and seeing what goes forward.
Right.
Even that one ring still, you won one. Same with the Saints. That Saints team has been they've mattered up on even this season. They finished at 5-11, one game out of the play. Right. They've mattered. So that one ring makes a difference a lot. I will say. You're
right. I was a lot more bitter the years before we won the Super Bowl. I really, really hated the Patriots. I detested their fan base. I hated Tom Brady. But as soon as we beat them, just that one year, as soon as we beat them and went on and won a Super Bowl, all that went out the door. And I just view them kind of I just respect them and just think to myself, they're a good team and they're very well run. Maybe they'll disagree and say when not like me doing this, but I say we're in the same boat as them in terms of management. We're well managed. We have a good head coach who's become a mainstay, and he's looking to stay in Baltimore for a long time and keep many, many years of excellence. He's just consistent, going to the playoffs every year and winning at least one playoff game every single year except one. That's no small feat. Belichick's the only other guy I can think of who has done that these past couple of years. So I just respect the Patriots now, and any decision they make, whether it's releasing the best cornerback in the league, or letting go of Vince Wilfork when he was still very, very capable of. He's still a top 10 defensive tackle in the league. But they do it, and no one bats an eye because it's Bill Belichick. He's got it under control. He knows what he's doing. He still has the draft to work things out and figure out who he wants to plug in. So the last one we kind of talked about a little bit. we talked more about the rumors of him signing for the Eagles during our Eagles discussion was Frank Gore. Talked about him a little bit with the whole 49ers capitulating and falling apart conversation we had, but he signed for Indy today.
Is that official now?
It's official.
Okay.
They haven't disclosed what the money is yet, I don't think.
Probably something similar to 312 with 7.5 guaranteed.
Okay, you heard it here first.
I mean, that's just what the Eagles were supposedly giving him.
Yeah, sure. Oh man, there's so many angles you can come at this one with, because for these last couple of years, the Colts have just tried to find an answer at running back. You know, they've obviously got the passing game down. They got the offensive line to make it work. They just can't find the guy who can get you 4 yards a carry. That's all you need, 4 yards.
What I love is their solution essentially became, let's have Ahmad Bradshaw run out of the backfield and just dump it off to him because we can't even have him run between the tackles.
Or we can't even give the ball to the guy we traded a first-round pick for.
I don't even want to mention him on this podcast.
For Trent Richardson. But probably, I'd say Trent Richardson Blows was in like the conversation as like our podcast name. Because, I don't know, that people ignore that because they are in such a good position. But they fucked up big time.
They did, and you know, it's funny you say that because we've been pretty serious this whole pod, but like, one of my favorite Trent Richardson moments was before the season. There was an Onion article, and I posted it, that said Trent Richardson gets stuck in an elevator at Colts practice, and essentially the story was he wasn't fast enough to get out. And,
oh my god!
And he couldn't advance the 3 feet necessary. And people were like, "Wow, you know, like he really has slowed down." People didn't understand it was satire because his career progression almost has been satire itself. Like he's a guy. I guess he looked good running behind a. Well, his stats look good running behind that Browns line, and it seemed at the time to someone, even myself included, didn't pay as much attention as they should have, that the Colts were making a real nice move, adding the number 3 pick in the draft to the number 1 pick in the draft from the year before, in getting Trent Richardson to go with Luck, and they had their backfield of the future with Luck under center, and Trent Richardson blow. There's no other way to put it. And Ryan Grigson has made some nice moves for the Colts. That was not one of them. That cost him a first round.
I feel like he never really had that much of a career before to warrant this, but has he warranted status of us calling him the artist formerly known as Trent Richardson?
Because I don't even want to acknowledge the name Trent Richardson in this conversation.
He actually looks like a shell of himself.
He's the kind of guy that we wouldn't even entertain conversations of buy low on him. You know, like, there's guys that you're like, oh, you know, like, every team looks like I'm like, we can be the ones to fix this guy. And no.
I would buy low on Denard Robinson or someone like that.
Yeah.
Like Pat White.
Some guy at least you could hope to turn into an X Factor. Like Pat White. I wouldn't want the Raiders to touch him for a minimum salary.
Right. Because
we can get better guys.
There's hundreds of guys coming into the league every year. Maybe not hundreds of running backs, obviously, but, you know, there's new guys coming in every year. To throw away your right to draft one of those new guys to get Trent Richardson, who didn't even run for 1,000 yards his rookie year. He had a great year, don't get me wrong, but didn't break 1,000, showed he was injury prone that year, and pretty much like had his best moments when he was allowed to play in space, which is kind of, for me, is kind of a red flag. Obviously, like, you want guys who can make guys miss in space or whatever. But as your every down running back who you're sending away a draft pick for, you want that guy to not go down with the first hit. You know?
Especially a big guy like Trent Richardson.
Yeah, that's worrying for me. And he's... we spent 30 seconds or a minute too long on Trent Richardson. But back to Frank Gore. I think... Obviously, he's not the Pro Bowl running back he used to be. But I don't think he has the mileage on him after 10 years in the league that other, like, 30-year-old or 32-year-old running backs do.
I mean, he's, like we said before, he's durable. He hasn't missed a game
That's not true. He's not durable. He had some pretty injury...
But he's proven himself in his late career to not miss a game. If anything, let's go with reliable. Like, again, and I think I like this move for the Colts because it lets them not necessarily correct a registered mistake, but bide their time. With him, with Ahmad Bradshaw, who's been a magnificent role player. Like, we know he's not a lead back, but he's done with both the Giants and now with the Colts. Shown exactly when you need him. He provides. He had a ton of receiving touchdowns last year because, again, the Colts can't run the ball.
Right.
This gives them another 2-3 years to find their guy. For a team like the Colts, this is a better move than spending, $9-10 million on DeMarco Murray and just trying to go all in.
I might go as far as to say that having Frank Gore and Ahmad Bradshaw, and again, let's just not even think about Trent Richardson or not even mention him. Having those two guys, that I'd be comfortable going into a season with those two guys.
And they have Boom Herron, too, who looked nice.
Right, that's true. So, I mean, I'd say their biggest worry now is the receiving core.
Well, one more guy we didn't mention, it looks like they might be close to signing Andre Johnson to replace Reggie Wayne.
Yeah.
I mean, we know he's getting old, and, he might not even be a 1,000-yard receiver anymore. But they have T.Y. Hilton as their number one guy. They definitely need a real threat
opposite him. Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. They have to worry about the receiving core and that they need someone to replace Reggie Wayne. But I like what they're doing, signing Frank Gore. Not a ton of money, not a big sexy deal or anything like that. Just real solid signing. He's shown, like you said, later in his career when he's been paired with other running backs who can take the load off of him and he's not carrying it 25 or 30 times a game, that he can still be a productive rusher and still a pretty good goal line threat. And Ahmad Bradshaw has obviously shown he can be the receiving threat and do a little bit of the between the tackle stuff too. So, yeah, I like what they're doing. Were there any other things?
One last thing to tack on the Colts. The Colts are obviously super fun to watch. They need to fix that defense. They made a good trade when they got Vontae Davis. They re-signed Darius Butler. They let Laron Landry go, who was terrible. And I don't know if you caught those pictures of him. They're pretty damn funny.
I mean, I've been saying it for the past 4 years. Laron Landry is. I'm pretty sure he's. What's his name? The Mountain. You know that guy?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's his understudy for Game of Thrones. So
his biceps might even be bigger.
Maybe,
but the question with the Colts is: are they right now are either a good bad team, or they're the worst good team in the league? I'm like,
I love that conversation. Yeah. Are they a good bad team or a bad good team?
It's
I feel like the Ravens always go through that where they're always there's stretches where they're just a bad good team for a very very long time, but
Andrew Luck proven himself the real deal as we expected. Great, but they're going to need him to take even another huge step forward, or that team as a whole is just going to it's almost like those are, and they made it to the AFC title game. It's almost like they're 10 empty wins every season, right?
Right. I mean, people forget that they were a couple of deflated footballs away from winning the Super Bowl. But on that note, I guess we'll finish up. Yeah, I mean, by the time this is posted, there'll probably be a million more deals that we haven't discussed that'll have come to fruition by then. But for the first week of NFL free agency, and I guess the first couple of hours of teams being allowed to trade and sign players, it's been a pretty exciting period.
I don't think we've ever seen anything like this.
Not in the past decade or so. So thanks again for listening, and forgive us if we miss anything over the couple of days.